Hey guys, welcome to the next Tailwind or Let's Build with Tailwind CSS series. This is going to be an actual full landing page build. So I figured we finally reached the point to where we're using components and vice versa and all the things that Tailwind offers out of the box to create. What I'm showing you here is a Wix template, which is a free template. I was looking around the web. I'm like, what could be cool to kind of mimic or copy in the sense of what's out there that people are attracted to. This is on the popular page on Wix.com. By no means am I a fan of Wix because it's a website builder, and if you looked at the source code of this site, it's pretty garbled and pretty gross. But that's just kind of how those builders work. They do everything inline, and it's just kind of yucky. Aside from my opinions, though, I wanted to create something that looked kind of neat, that was something maybe unorthodox. So this is like a movie production thing. It's a free template if you want to actually edit and use this site. But there are other pages too. I focus mainly on this first front page just to show you like a live example of using Tailwind to the full extent of an actual web page. So with that in mind, here's my finished piece. If you notice, I just switched tabs. They're pretty darn close, which is pretty neat. We're using some Google fonts, some actual customized configurations for Tailwind. I didn't integrate the full slider. Anything that's pretty interactive that you see on this template isn't over on the actual template that I'll have on GitHub and link you to. But overall, the gist of it is there. There is just some lorem ipsum kind of text in these. But this is all CSS, this is all Tailwind. There are some exceptions in terms of heights that I needed some custom CSS for, but other than that, I use Tailwind to the full extent. So I just wanted to promote how wildly awesome and reusable Tailwind is in terms of not having to write actual custom CSS. So we'll be creating this and more in this video. I'm hoping it is a long one, but it is kind of a full page. So maybe I'll break it up into 2 videos. If not, sorry in advance, but if you prefer one or the other, let me know. So here we go. On the local environment, I will go ahead and credit the actual template and the source code you'll see, as well as the fonts we use, which are Google fonts. So there's one called Poppins and one called Barlow that we use and extend Tailwind with. But to get started, I want to actually use a Tailwind repo. That is kind of Adam Wathan's starting point for Tailwind CSS. So Tailwind, there it is. So if you find this, I would start it. It's pretty neat, but it's just a post CSS configuration to run a basic install of Tailwind locally. That's updated to the latest version. It is only 2 months old, so it's, I guess, not 100% up to date, but it's pretty darn close. So what I'll do is clone this down and Git and start from there. So I'm going to go into my sites directory. I have this directory already of the current site, but I'm going to CD up a level. And I've created a root Tailwind CSS directory to house all these projects in. So I'm going to just create a new one. So I'll make a new directory called Tailwind landing page, just as a starting point. Then we get CD into that Tailwind landing page. And then I'll go ahead and clone this down. So git clone. I copied that when I was on the site earlier. So it's Tailwind CSS / playground.git. So we'll clone that into this directory. And below it'll have a directory called playground. I could have passed the period there, so it just cloned it. So we'll open this and just kind of modify that to be at root level. So I'll get rid of this playground folder. Copy these with Command C. Paste them in. Get rid of playground. I'm actually going to get rid of git too and initialize it on my own. Get rid of this VS Code folder too. We don't need that. Okay, so I will go ahead and git init. And that reinitialized or initialized it in our git stuff, so we don't commit to Adam's stuff, which we couldn't do anyway. But aside from that, we are ready to run yarn. And it's going to go fetch all the dependencies in the package.json file. So what I'll do is open up that in a second so you can see what we're actually dependent on. So open this in Visual Studio Code. And here's where we're at. So we've got basic post CSS config, which is more or less how Tailwind works. It's a post CSS plugin. We've got our default theme. I'm going to go ahead and grab the default one from the repo in a second. and then just extend it there. Right now, nothing comes stock. But here are the dependencies that we use. So it's a post CSS CLI stuff, some live server stuff, CSS Nano, cross-env concurrently, and then purge CSS for production. So when this does run, say in your node production environment, you can actually tell it to run the actual purge CSS and then like kind of customize the CSS there with CSS Nano. So it's just kind of a nice to have. Definitely consider doing that because the library itself is pretty massive once you get going with it and use the full default template. So any classes you wouldn't use in the actual project would actually get stripped away from your code, which is great. So with this done, we can just go ahead and say git init, or we'll say git add everything, git commit. I'm going to call it init. Great. So we're ignoring just a few files in our git ignore, and that would be, of course, the node modules, the yarn lock file, and the public build, which gets generated once we run any of the commands found here. So we've got 3 to choose from. Serve is the basic one I'll basically use for now. Production will just run the same command that the development does, but the development specific or production specific code like you see here, like so we can check the node environment. So it's kind of just a nice to know. With that done, we're basically ready to roll. There are a few assets I'll use in this little series or whatever I'm going to call it. So I'll actually probably steal those from the project that I have open already, but you can feel free to steal those from the source code. So I'm going to go ahead and this is the final piece. I'm going to steal at least the links to reference for now. Index HTML. I'm going to get rid of everything in the body class. Great. And then at the very top, I'll put an HTML comment. And just paste this stuff in so you have access to it as well. So we will need to link the style sheets from Google. So I'll actually just do that too. I'll copy this one down right here. This is all kind of just config based stuff. Don't really need to use these fonts, but to copy this template, I kind of wanted it to be pretty close. So we'll say Tailwind. Let's see, movie. Production, maybe production. Awesome. Okay. So with that done, we should be ready to rock and roll. Let me double check any assets we need. We need a video for sure. The index, there's some images I'll copy over. So I'll just do a Command C. Can I do that in this? Oh, that's nice. Command C on a Mac copies that over. We'll do the same here with the video. Pretty cool. So the video, I went ahead and just kind of viewed source on that template just to get it done for you because it's kind of a pain in the ass to find. But it basically just dig deep in a bunch of divs and then you'll finally get to where you can see the video source and just download it. From there, we've got a playground set up. Great. And this is the current final piece. What I'm going to do is go over to that in Yarn. I have that running in a new tab. I'm going to go ahead and quit that one. So here we'll say Yarn serve and see where we're at. Okay, so here's our bare bones template. This is nothing to do here basically so far. So that's pretty good at our basic starting point, blank slate. Okay, so I've got our Google font. What I want to actually do is change the configuration to accommodate our new fonts first, just to get that rolling, and some colors as well. We're going to basically mimic that brand color to be orange. So there's an orange here that doesn't come by default with the Tailwind library, so we can get that. But first I'm going to get the Tailwind default hub.com/Tailwind CSS. There's a default theme you can get if you go to Tailwind CSS repo. There's going to be a stubs folder and then a default config stub, which I'm going to use as our starting point. In your project, definitely like remove stuff you know you're not going to use from this file because it's going to generate a lot of CSS classes that you may not need. And in doing so, it would save you a lot of bandwidth in terms of the file size. So in this tailwind.config file.js, we'll just actually copy that all in and we should be set. So there's a few configurations we're going to change in here, just a few. So there's going to be one called brand. We're going to grab that color value, and I'll actually go to that page, and we can do it just this way. So inspect element and grab the background color. I wish it was hex value. Why is it not hex? There we go. So go back to inspector, and then we should see that color value, which is what we want. That's going to be the new basic brand color. We'll leave it as is. And then we're ready to rock and roll with that. And then on top of that, we want to set up our fonts to use this as well. So we need to accommodate the new Google fonts that we had linked. So you can set them up by first linking them in the actual index file, but then we got to tell Tailwind about those. So right now in our fonts, we've got just our basic default system fonts set up here. So the Sans font, for instance, is just the default. That would be pretty decent across all browsers, but we need to change that to accommodate. So we're gonna have two different fonts. One was that Poppins one, and the other was the Barlow. So instead of all of these, I'm gonna just do Barlow, comma there, and then we'll just do sans serif as a fallback for the defaults in the browser. And after that, we want to actually add an actual new attribute that I'm gonna call alt. One thing to note, when you add something here, it needs to be either just one word or camel case. So like alt font would be another way you can add. You notice flex shrink or font family, for instance, has that camel case going on. That's important. So let's just add a simple one called alt though to make it easy. And then this is going to be that Poppins font. Sans serif, comma. Okay. And with that in mind, we should be pretty close on some of these settings. There are some that I'm going to have to adjust as we go. I'll probably come back and do that just so we can see it in actual action, just so you're not out of context. But essentially, we're ready to rock and roll. So I'm going to go into the browser. This is our working document. I'll put far right, and then our reference will be far left. And I'm going to close that one and this one. I'm going to pin this one just so I don't close it by mistake. Okay, so our first order of business is actually, there's a black setting that I'm going to change real quick. Instead of straight up black, I'm going to change this to 0D. Oops, 0D, not OD, 0D. To kind of just an off, really dark gray that isn't full black, because full black's pretty black. So to offset that, we will accommodate that setting. Okay, so with that in mind, we're ready to rock and roll. Let's go ahead and start with the body background. We could say BG black. And if we go back, oh look, it's black. Pretty cool. Okay, so now we just continue on. So let's add a giant header block. This is going to be the primary source of both the video background and also just the navigation. So we're going to start, I'm going to give it a custom class header. We need to set a custom height for that. Unfortunately, Tailwind has height up into a certain point, but we need it to be a little more than that in the end. So that's going to come into effect in our Tailwind CSS file. And where you're going to put your custom CSS is in between components and utilities. And that's because this will output anything you author here after the fact that all the other classes have been generated. So it's all just kind of streamlined. So since this is min width first, we're going to start with the header and make it height of auto. And this is traditional CSS, so don't confuse it for Sass at this point. So header nav, I'm going to do a little more background. These are just going to be a few lines of custom styles we'll use. And I'll show you, this is going to be on our mockup. This is the actual background that I'm just coding right there. So we'll have that in order here soon. We still need the elements on the page though to really see it. So then we'll have a video CTA. I'll get to this point. I'm just going to add these for now. Height is auto. So this is all what would happen on mobile basically. And then after that, we're going to just do an @media min width. of 12 or 10 to 24. And within that, we'll actually define some heights. So header, since Tailwind again doesn't have defined heights besides after a certain point, we're going to just go ahead and make a rigid height here of 726 for the header. And then the video CTA will be 582. I just determined those by basically inspecting the DOM element on the example. And then finally, I made a basic component with the buttons in mind. So we'll reuse this, I think, only twice, sadly. But if you were to extend this, this is how I would do it. So when you make a component in Tailwind, you can use this add apply rule. And it's part of post CSS that allows you to apply actual classes as CSS in your file. So it's pretty neat. So we'll just use the basic stuff like BG brand, since we generated that new brand color here. That's going to go output all the other classes we need relative to that color. So now we have that in our arsenal, and we'll say text white, px10, py3, my2, and inline block. Kind of just a basic default button. You can add hover states here too if you want. That's just one way to extend it. Okay, so now back to our markup. This is kind of going to be where we're going to be most of the time from now on. So I need to set this to relative because we're going to have that video be absolutely positioned within this. You'll see that in a second. So we'll say overflow hidden. Okay, here's that div that we're going to basically wrap a video element in. So we'll say video. And the source will just be video.mp4. We've got it in our base public directory, so we don't have to go into any folder to see it. And then within that, I want to set autoplay. Oops. You can set these configurations inline. So we'll say muted, loop, and then we'll give it a class of object cover. This is so it's more or less responsive. You need to set a width and a height though, and you should be good. Above that, we need to set this to absolute. And then it's going to be inset 0, which basically means make the top, left, right, and bottom all 0 values. And then I add a custom property here called z negative. There is no basic default of a negative z index in Tailwind, so I added that as a new property. And that's done. I'll show you here. If you find your z index group, I'll just search for it, z index. Really? Z index. There we go. Okay, so there's auto, but I want to actually do negative, and -1 would actually conflict because that dash would actually be recognized as like a dash in the class name. So instead, I just went in with the negative actual keyword, and then we can just have a colon and just put -1 as the value. So it's like a key value pair. So now we have that in our arsenal, and negative should work now. So the point of that is to put it all the way back off everything else in mention, just so the video is in the very background. So we'll set the opacity to 100 on large displays. And then when it gets down lower to mobile displays, the text is going to overlap the video quite a lot. So I actually decrease the opacity as a result. And while I'm at it, I'm going to install an extension via, or what is it called, Tailwind. This IntelliSense one, that's the one that was actually recommended when you installed that repo. But it's nice as a drop down to when you type Tailwind classes, it knows what's going on. So I'll show by example here. So opacity, see, so I'll just do 50. Of course, autocomplete's weird, but all right. So after the video, we're going to have a nav element. The nav itself is going to be a bit of padding on medium screens, padding Y of 2, px3, and then z10. We're going to set it above everything. Inside that, we'll have a container class, which basically sets a default, max width on a container. It doesn't set the margin auto though, so we'll have to do that too. So I'll do mx auto, and then on medium screens, we want to display flex. And then on mobile, we'll say block. And then we'll want flex properties too. So flex wrap means it'll break when you shrink the screen. It'll go ahead and collapse as intended. And then we can set the items to center to justify center up and down, and justify start to actually start on the left instead of like sporadic through the actual div. So that's our basic starting point. Within that, we're gonna have a flex 1. And this will span the whole width of its container. So I'll show you that in a second. So flex item center and justify between. We're gonna get the logo in, which I think I forgot to copy over, so we'll have to do that. Get the href, just a basic link there, and then inside that an image source with the logo.webp. So GSL logo. We'll go grab that on the other project. Logo, here it is. If we go back to the browser, we should have some starting point. There's the video, it's working, and the logo, and the basic background of the nav component. So we've used source real quick. It could show you the nav or header area is 762. If I didn't set that, it would go like that, which is the reason I had that custom height. And then within that, we'll have the nav component, which has, or will have, that background color too. Awesome. So a good starting point. Now we need the actual links in the navigation. So we've got our logo in this Flex 1 div. Aside from that, I'm going to actually include a button that will be on mobile. And we'll add a bit of JavaScript to make this work. So I'm going to target it with data attributes. So data menu toggle. And we'll set this up once we get the markup complete. We'll say medium will be hidden but block on mobile. And we'll give it just a little bit of padding on the right. And to save time, I will copy this SVG over I used there. It's going to be this bit. It's just like a hamburger icon that you might be familiar with. Pretty cool. I added about 4 classes. So fill current basically means it takes the current text color as its fill. And the current text color I set is white. And then the width and the height were 6 in terms of Tailwind properties. So outside of this div, now we can add a UL, which will be the legit menu. We're going to target this again with JavaScript. This will be what we expand and collapse essentially on mobile, which you've probably seen in the wild. So the class will be medium flex and then hidden on mobile. By default, we'll basically toggle that class in the end. So flex wrap, item center, justify start, and text white. So within the UL, we're going to have LIs, and I'm going to do a class that will repeat. So MDPX6, and within each we'll have a link, which doesn't need any stuff besides the text. So we'll have home, and we could set this one to active, which will basically mean text brand 500. And then the LI below it, in fact, I'll just copy this. And fix up the indentation real quick. So we have home, then we have stream by. And I'll show you, I'm grabbing all this from this basic menu here. So there's coming soon, catalog, about us, and contact. And contact. The thing I want to change that I just spotted was that all of these have that text brand class, so let's get rid of those. I'm just command clicking to get all the cursors. Cool. So let's see how that looks on our project. Very good. Looks like the home link isn't doing what I would hoped. So I think we're gonna just do text brand. There we go. We don't have the full stream of colors as Tailwind sets for the other colors at this point. On mobile, we'll see this is what happens when we shrink down. Looks like I have a whole nother browser open. I'm gonna close these. And within that, we should be good. The one thing I noticed is the header itself isn't quite up to spec here. We want that to be a full width when it's on mobile. I'm not sure how that occurred. Let's double check our CSS. I think it's because I don't have content in that yet. So once we get there, it should fill the container itself, just the way the content will flow. So I'm jumping ahead is the problem. Okay, so let's get to that point then. So below the nav element will be real content we'll have within that. So we'll have a base container and we'll do MX auto so it shifts to the center. And then on large screens, we're going to do a pretty big margin top value and padding left and right values, so PX 16. And then on mobile, we'll go back down to PX4 and PY4. Inside this, we'll have a class. I'll just type it. So div class MD PL8. So kind of offset it on the header portions. Margin will be border left and border white. We'll only want that border on medium screens and up. And then within that, we'll have a P tag. It'll have quite a few classes. Text white, tracking wide, text base, font light. That's basically setting the font weight to light and then letting none. So when I linked the original HTML, we've only got a couple weights. So 400 and 700 for Barlow and 300 and 400 for Poppins. The more you add there, the higher bandwidth it is to load that property. So keep that in mind. You don't need every font under the sun, but this design unfortunately uses quite a few, which means it's probably not that performant. So way to go, Wix. So text white is for the H1. This will be the main intro of the site. So set it pretty dang large. So 6XL on medium screens and then 2XL on smaller screens. Font will be bold. We'll just go ahead and call it font sans. So it's that Barlow font. Margin 0. And we're going to reset the leading to none just so it's tight. And it's going to be called Knights of Wales. Let's see how that looks. Cool, so that's mobile. It is filling up as I predicted, so that's great. We'll get out of the mobile view and go back to the beginning. Very cool. So it's taking shape. Let's go ahead and add more content below the H1. Be a basic P class tag. Text white, text large. Medium will be max width large. That'll be on medium screens, and then we'll kind of make it width full on small screens, and we'll do some top and bottom margin on medium screens and up. And I'm probably just going to do lorem here, a question mark. Okay, and then we'll finally have our call to action there. So it's going to actually reference that button primary class we created as a component in our Tailwind file. So this one in particular. So button primary. And we'll say stream by. Cool. So it doesn't have a hover state right now. I'm curious what this one does. Yeah, it's like black, which is a terrible choice, but let's go ahead and do that. So we could say button primary hover and then say apply BG black. I think the rest is fine. So we'll just get this. That's that version. This is our version. This button's slightly bigger, but I like it more. So I'm going with it. But there's our starting point. So we already have in very little time a full header with a background video going on and a responsive mobile menu. So it's pretty neat. While we're at it, why don't we just add the JavaScript next, just so we can get that in order. There's very little to add, but I want to make sure we get it. So I think that completes the header portion, so we'll move on to the other content in a second. But I do want to add just some basic script for toggling that mobile menu. So this is how I would maybe approach it. So in my other project, I just had a basic index.js file, and we'll reference that to include what we need. So the main thing I want to do is target both. I'll go back to the code. Target the data attributes we added. So I've got one that's data menu toggle and data menu. So the idea is when you click the toggle, we want to toggle the actual data menu class, basically toggle this hidden attribute. We can also toggle the color of the data menu toggle too. I'll make it maybe the brand color. So let's make some variables just because. So menu target. Now if you were to have more of these on the site anywhere else, you maybe do a query selector all and then just do like a for each concept, so you loop through everything. But in our case, it's just the one spot, so we don't really need to worry about it right now. So I'm going to grab the data menu toggle just like so, and the menu itself too. So we'll just say similar document.query selector and data menu. I prefer data attributes because they're not ordinary and you can spot them pretty easily in your markup. So oftentimes I would also do like a JS prefix, so JS blah 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 as a class name. Either way works. I think just something that's, when you glance at it, you could probably understand that the intent is to be interactive. Makes sense, as opposed to like using an ID or a class randomly in the mix. That's something that's helped me, so you can do whatever you want. Okay, so we're gonna focus on the menu target and add a event listener, which will be a click. And within that, I'm just gonna use ES6 because it's nicer. You don't need semicolons either. In fact, I will remove these. So when we click on that thing, what do we want to do? First, we want to make sure it doesn't do what it normally does, so we can prevent default. But we need to get that event passed through, so you can actually do so like this. And after that's done, we want to target the menu itself. And we could just say the built-in toggle property of hidden, really. That's like the main gist right there. So we need to be on mobile. So I'll go ahead and go down to that. And there we go. Pretty cool. So what that's doing, if you don't know, there's a hidden, normally a hidden class here. So when it closes, watch that DOM element. See that hidden class? It gets added and removed every time you click this. So it's kind of just a toggle on, toggle off. And to go one step further, why don't we make that menu icon like orange or something when we click it. So target class list dot toggle. Actually, we need to do menu target, and we need to find the SVG within that. So if that's not clear, we've got the menu and the target itself. The toggle, we need the child of that thing. So what you can do is use this property called last element child, which is basically the last thing inside the contained element. And in our case, there's only one, so that makes sense that this works. And we'll say class list toggle, and we just use our text brand class. So this is targeting that SVG in the end. So when we do hit that button, the SVG should get a new text brand class name as opposed to that white one. It'll basically just override the white one. That's pretty neat. Cool. So that's basically it for the JavaScript portion. Next up, we'll just continue down. We've got a section that's pretty heavily interactive, but not one we're going to worry about in terms of interactivity, in terms of this slideshow. So this kind of concept here. What I'm more focused on is just displaying the images in a way and then having this hover state as well as this context up here. So let's get busy. Inside this file, below the header element, I'll just make another container div. We'll just do mx auto. So it's floated center. And this is going to be just this text that we saw right here. So this text. So it's pretty much nothing, but it's still requires some markup. So say margin Y6 and then large PX16, offset it from left and right, and then PX4 on mobile. And we'll do another UL just to kind of make this a list item. Display flex on this just so it's like inline. I find Flexbox easier to control in terms of like centering items as opposed to like inline block or something if you're used to the CSS world. So let's say text gray 500 for the default, and then font alt. This will be that Poppins font, as you can see there. I love this little plugin. It's kind of nice. So within the LI, we've got a class of text gray 300 and PR2. So within that will be our latest releases. And then we'll have one LI that's just got this, whatever those are called, vertical stick thing. I don't know. And then the reason I had set the text gray is because that basically encapsulates all of these. But then if you set this on the element itself, it'll go ahead and override it. So now this will be that text gray 500 color, which you'll see in a second. So then below that, we'll have another PR right class. Within that, we'll have a link, which will be the other call to action, which will just be watch all. And we could set that to the text brand class. So that gives us this little bit of navigation there. And you notice it's a new font too, so that's working great. Very cool. All right, I'm gonna space these out just so it's easier to see. So below this will be that collection of stills and the hover states that appear on them in our example here. So this stuff. And they're pretty nifty. I already supplied the images. If you have an images directory in the repo, go ahead and check that out if you want to download those and use these as opposed to viewing source on that theme from Wix. So we'll start with the flex wrap kind of concept. So flex, and we'll say item stretch and justify start. MB10, so give it some offset on the bottom and right with padding. And we're going to set overflow hidden. We want this to kind of mimic that sliding effect, but not actually work because I'm not going to code that. Inside that, we'll have a series of links that will be each thumbnail. So think of it as a click through to one of the videos you could go watch or something. For each of those, we're going to have a class relative and a group class. So group is unique in the sense that when you supply this class, things below it, like say on hover, you can do a collection of attributes relative to this group class. So I'll show you that in a second. I want it to be block, margin right 4, and definitely flex shrink 0, so it doesn't shrink when we add more. And inside that, we'll have a div. This is going to be the hover effect, so we can actually set it to absolute and inset 0. BG black, this will be what basically when you hover over this will be displaying. So we have BG black and then opacity 75 and hidden by default. And then here's that group thing. So group hover, we say flex. That basically just displays it flex as opposed to hidden. And because I'm displaying it flex, I want the content in it to be like fixed to the bottom. So we can actually do that with flex column. But then you need to tell it to justify to the end, which means from top to bottom in flex column world, as opposed to flex row, which is the from left to right. So it's kind of a brain teaser, but once you do it enough, it makes complete sense. So PY4, and then we'll say a cursor pointer. So within that will be the actual content we can see, and within each we want a div that's just kind of globally enclosing all this stuff. So we'll have an H3 and it'll be class text large, and margin bottom 2, 30 yards. And within that, just a p tag, I'm gonna make the leading normal. Basically means the line height, and we'll do some lorem. Okay, and then below the two closed divs, we'll have the actual image that you see by default. So in this case, it'll be image 1 JPEG, and you can set alt to whatever. I'll let you set that. And then we basically rinse and repeat. So I'm gonna do this for about 6 or 7 more images, I think. So there's 1. Yeah, I think I just did 6. So we'll start from the bottom, do 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's see how that looks. That's the demo, and here's ours. So we've got this going on. It looks like the hover effect isn't quite working though. So let's see where we went wrong. Okay guys, I realized I made a configuration error, so I need to enable group hover and display properties. So that doesn't come by stock with Tailwind. So what you need to do is go down to display, and there's this preset where you can append certain settings for each thing. So by default, display only has responsive, but if we say group, I think it's group, might be group hover. Yeah, group hover. This is why I couldn't hover, it wasn't quite working. So if we save and refresh, we should get that now. That's one extra parameter you need to add. Basically add some classes to make this work. Okay, so this video has gone on, I think, long enough. So I think I'm gonna stop here and continue on in the very next one. So I'll see you in that one. Hello Rails is my new course on Ruby on Rails. I'll teach you Ruby on Rails from the ground up. Visit hellorails.io for more information.